On July 25th, 1950, some 600 Korean civilians left their homes and began an arduous trudge southwards in search of safety and shelter. By the 29th, at least 100 of them, possibly more than 300, would be dead, slaughtered without mercy or compassion. The Korean War is often discussed in stark terms: capitalism versus communism, West versus East, sophisticated military tactics versus human wave assaults. And yet, in this broad stroke approach to history, often it is the humanity of the situation that gets forgotten. For those 4 dark days, it was American guns that terrorized the refugees, and when salvation finally came, it wore a North Korean uniform. This is the story of the No Gun Ri Massacre, a reminder that war is rarely straightforward, never quite what it seems, and always tragic. Dawn had not yet broken on June 25th, 1950, when more than 100,000 North Korean soldiers poured across the 38th parallel, which split the peninsula in half. The Seoul government, along with the small American garrison in the country, was caught unawares. The Korean War had begun. North Korean forces advanced at a frightening pace. The armies of the South Korean president, Syngman Rhee, were in disarray, while his American counterpart, Harry Truman, struggled to muster a meaningful defense for his East Asian allies. Throughout July, both South Korean and American troops fell in scores around Osan, Daejeon, and Daegu, and along the Kum River and elsewhere. Hundreds of thousands of Korean civilians streamed southwards in a frantic attempt to escape the fighting. This gave the defenders another problem. If guerrilla forces secreted themselves among these refugees, Seoul could find itself surrounded and the south would fall. The village of No Gun Ri is in North Chungcheong province, right in the heart of central South Korea and hundreds of miles from the Imjin River and the 38th parallel. But by late July, the region was right on the front line. On July 25th, North Korean troops took the town of Yeongdong to the north. American troops in the area began evacuating civilians from villages around the town. Head south, the Americans demanded, away from the fighting. There, you'll be safe. But a conflicting order, delivered by the American 8th Army the following day, would seal their fate. No refugees will be permitted to cross battle lines at any time, the order read. Movement of all Koreans in groups will cease immediately. Refugees of Yeongdong had been heading for safety, but now they were on course for disaster. As more than 600 refugees reached the village of Hagari on the evening of the 25th, a US Army detachment kept a careful watch over the column. When a handful of refugees broke from the group that night, the Americans opened fire, killing up to 7 of them. It was a grim prelude to the tragedy to come. The refugees had slept in the open air on a riverbank at Hagari, and when they awoke on the 26th, they found the American soldiers accompanying them had departed. They continued another 3.5 miles along the road toward No Gun Ri. It was approaching noon as the civilian column reached the American checkpoint outside the village. The 7th Cavalry Regiment had only been at the front for 3 days, but they knew their orders. The column would not be permitted to pass. They ordered the refugees off the road and up onto the nearby railway embankment. Knives were taken from the civilians, anything that could be used as a weapon, and other belongings too. The refugees, exhausted and wilting under the savage midday sun, handed over these possessions and lay themselves down on the embankment, seeking rest and shade. It's likely that the 600 did not know about the order issued by the 8th Army that day. Perhaps, they thought, as they sought shelter from the heat, that if they simply played ball with the Americans, their allies, let's not forget, they would be allowed to go on their way. And so, As the drone of military aircraft cut through the oppressive heat, it's possible they didn't consider this particularly alarming. The first rake of gunfire would have changed all that. Screams of terror filled the air as the American planes unleashed cannons and explosive ordnance on the refugees beside the tracks. Running, tripping, and tumbling down the embankment, the refugees scrambled away from the onslaught. It's not known how many fell in this initial aerial assault, but dead bodies littered the slope, the wounded among them crying out from where they'd been struck down. Survivors crouched in a culvert at the foot of the embankment as the planes disappeared, but mortar rounds from the nearby 7th Cavalry began to land. Small arms fire from the approaching soldiers cut down yet more civilians. The culvert offered little defense. A double tunnel beneath the rail line offered a small hope of safety. Refugees gathered here, cowering in the 24-meter-long passages, still probably unable to make sense of what was happening to them. As American soldiers approached the straight's open tunnels from both ends, they found themselves staring down that double barrel with an unbroken field of fire. They opened up, and the tunnels became death alleys, littered with civilian bodies. What had begun as a frenzy of killing became a waiting game as the refugees built barricades from their fallen comrades. Searchlights were brought in, lighting up the full horror of the tunnels, now spattered red with gore. A small number of refugees managed to escape, but more were cut down as the firing continued throughout the night. There were more airstrikes on July 27th. Refugees huddled in their shared trauma and tried to stay alive by drinking the crimson water of the stream that trickled beneath the bridge. For those who remained alive, those tunnels would have felt like the end of the world. Two dead, lonely eyes peering out from beneath the cratered railway above. But the wider theater of conflict was expanding its scope, and North Korean forces were advancing on No Gun Ri. Artillery fire and mortar rounds began to hit the 7th Cavalry positions along the tracks. Still, they trained their guns on the tunnels, sniping anything that moved and unleashing volleys of machine gun fire periodically, but they had one nervous eye on the north and on the enemy soldiers now only 2 miles away. Early on the 29th, the 7th Cavalry quietly withdrew. The survivors in the tunnels, frozen with fear, did not move. They'd seen what happened to anyone who did, their own friends, family members. That afternoon, the traumatized survivors began to hear new voices, speaking a language familiar to them. These northern accented soldiers informed the refugees that the nightmare was over, that they could go home. Around 24 survivors, mainly children, small enough to hide themselves within piles of adult bodies, emerged from the tunnels, received food, water, and medical treatment from the North Korean forces, and began their journeys back north, back to the villages they'd left behind only 4 days earlier. Official reports made no mention of what had taken place at No Gun Ri. For decades after the end of the Korean War, as the North and South eyed each other uneasily from either side of the 38th parallel, the massacre was a poorly guarded secret, something that many people knew about, but had never been officially acknowledged. It would be almost 50 years until the Associated Press team of Sang Hun Cho, Martha Mendoza, Charles J. Hanley, and Randy Hershaft turned their investigative attention to what had occurred on those 4 bloody days. Their 1999 report would win the team the Pulitzer Prize and would force the Bill Clinton administration to confront the reality of what happened. President Clinton expressed his sorrow at the massacre. The official response described it as a deeply regrettable accompaniment to a war. No apology was issued and no compensation was offered. It's unknown just how many civilians died in those tunnels or elsewhere at No Gun Ri in the summer of 1950. Some put the number at 100, others believe more than 300 perished. The Korean War offered little glory to the American military, from those initial humiliations to the eventual stalemate. But No Gun Ri is a particularly shameful chapter in a conflict that, in many senses, has still not come to an end.